What's up, guys? Welcome back to the Comfort Zone Commander podcast, your place for some casual, comfortable Commander conversations. I'm your host, Dan. That's your host, John. John, what are we talking about today?
Today, we're going to be doing our Comfort Zone Commander top 10 mana rocks. Now, before we go into all the questions and the whiches and the whats, we're doing a little bit of a different spin on the top 10. We're not going for straight power top 10. The list would be filled with the soul range and the arcane signets, and that's not really what we're looking for. But we also tried to steer away from some of those super niche, run it in one deck in the last 20 years kind of cards. So we're going to try to give a nice thing of utility mana rocks, and that's what we're going for today.
Yeah, you know it, guys. We love our utility rocks over here in the Comfort Zone. Anything that does more than just add the mana, adds the spice. And you know we're looking for that spice over here. But before we get into the list, go ahead and do us a favor, guys, and go ahead down there, down in this little region and massage that subscribe button for us and make it a little bit more comfy down there. Because we got a lot of views coming on, but not as many subscribers. And we're looking to take the channel all the way to the moon, and it really helps us out a lot. It goes a long way, more than you know, and it helps us keep making this content for you and chasing that end goal. And while you're down there, check out the description for links to our Patreon and our Discord if you want to go the extra mile, show some extra love, or just hang out with the boys. But without further ado, get comfortable, because we're diving in with number 10. John, what do we got?
All right, so for number 10, we're going to start with one of my personal favorites, but also something that adds a lot of layers and an alternate win con to your game of Magic the Gathering. So, STKshaven Stadium. We're coming in with a 3-mana mana rock, which has been doing a lot with all different kinds of 3-mana mana rocks. This one comes in and taps to add a waste mana, and then you put a point counter on the STKshaven Stadium. So, whenever a creature deals combat damage to you, you're going to remove a point counter from the STKshaven Stadium. Gone. Goodbye. But whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to an opponent, you're going to put a point counter back on the STKshaven Stadium. And then, if it has 10 or more point counters on it, remove them all, and that player loses the game. I think this card's super interesting. Obviously, we're coming in with a 3-mana mana rock. Adds mana, doesn't add colors. But the whole layer, it adds like a mini game inside your game of Commander, which I think is super neat.
Yeah, I like STKshaven Stadium a lot, specifically because of the player interactive portion of it. Now, granted, it does kind of paint a target on you if you start to inch those counters up, and I get that, but I kind of like that sometimes. Commander, you guys know this from brewing, of course, but part of the vibe is the challenge, right? Mm-hmm. It's one of the reasons why, honestly, I prefer casual Commander, which sounds weird. I know that there's challenge associated with CDH, don't get me wrong, but in the play groups I have, right, if I were to come and build a CDH deck or something really gassed, it would stomp, and it'd be very pub stompy, and it wouldn't actually present the challenge that I'm seeking, because I don't just want that easy victory. In communities where maybe you have more of a CDH presence, going CDH to CDH might provide that same level of challenge. In my opinion, STKshaven Stadium does a really cool thing, not only adding the minigame, but it does create these situations of kind of, fluctuating challenge. As you get closer to your alternative victory, you draw more attention and you get more combat presented to you that way. You need to adapt for that scenario. It forces interaction is basically what I'm saying, which I think is really neat.
Yeah. The interaction is, again, one of the reasons that I like the card so much as well. I also like that as far as alternate win conditions, it's stable into a mana rock, which is very odd, but it's not a you win the game. It's a that person loses the game. It's almost like, especially in a 4-player game, you have the option to ding a point here, that player, this player, that player, but it's only when you break the 10 counters that person is then going to be the person who gets cut out of the game. So I like that it's not this thing where, okay, well, if I have 100 creatures and I send 30 at that guy and 30 at that guy and 40 at that guy, I'm just going to win by getting all the points. You have to kind of take the points where you can get them, and then make sure that if you're going to hit that final point, that you kind of know what you're doing with that. I think there's a really easy way you could somebody could intentionally, who's about to die anyway, take the loss if somebody else has the ability to deal with you. They could, I feel like the interplay there is something that I haven't experienced as much as I'd like, but I think is there in the card, which is like really interesting.
Yeah, that's cool. I do really like that, actually. Now that you pointed out, I wasn't really even thinking about that in my first analysis here, because I don't really run this in many decks, but I do really appreciate it, and I do like that. It's kind of like that door to nothingness vibe, which I run in Ramos, which like if you can neg one guy, you know what I mean, like it doesn't immediately end the game, so it feels like a fair alternative win con, because it really isn't like a win con. You know what I mean? It's just a lose con for one single person. So that's also interesting. Yes, like you were saying, because maybe they don't choose to take the L themselves, but there could be some interplay between you and your opponents trying to allow you to get a couple incidental counters if you politically kind of agree to steer those counters once you get the 10th towards the person who's kind of in the lead. I also like the idea, not to ramble on too much, but I like the idea of running this 2 in decks that don't necessarily plan to go so wide that you drop Strixhaven Stadium and swing in for 30. Like, if you just play this in a deck where you might get a ping here and there, it might be one of those things that negates that targeting aspect of it, where people don't necessarily pay much attention to you for a while because they're kind of forgetful that it's even really happening. Or you can just kind of pick it up incidentally, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, wait, dude over there's got a Strixhaven Stadium that's about to pop. All of a sudden now you're a problem, which kind of creates exciting gameplay moments. Maybe not ones that assist your victory supremely, but all of this interaction and gameplay manipulation just stapled onto a mana rock is the reason why I think it's on this list for us, because mana rocks can just have mana. But this thing can totally change the shape of the game for ways that are a lot more interactive, political, fun, so on and so forth, which I think is really cool. But next up, number 9, we got the Coveted Jewel, which is doing somewhat similar, game manipulation things, but let's dive into it. So Coveted Jewel, if you haven't seen it, is a 6 mana rock. Enters the battlefield, you draw 3 cards, and then you can tap it to add 3 mana of any one color. BTW, it does not enter tapped or anything. And then it says whenever one or more creatures an opponent controls attacks you and aren't blocked, that player draws 3 cards and gains control of the Coveted Jewel and untaps it. So the Coveted Jewel is really, really interesting, in my opinion, for like I said, many similar reasons. This thing immediately drops down and gives you giant advantage. Like, a draw 3 is crazy. And then tap to add 3 is even crazier. So I always like to think about things like this, although I know it's not the best way, because you have to be able to hit the 6 threshold. But obviously, if you're paying 6 and then you drop it and add 3 back, it's kind of like it net costs you 3 mana. So for 3 mana to draw 3 is already a supreme rate, obviously. And then if you happen to be able to hold possession of the jewel, obviously in your next turn, now it's going to just net you 3 positive mana, which is also nutty. So I like the jewel for its incredible power play as soon as it comes down and in subsequent turns. I also like it because it just adds, again, that interactive element to the game, where now there's, yes, I know it's painting a bit of a target on you, but like I said, that presents the challenge, not only in theory crafting, when you're brewing your deck, to try to brew a deck that's prepared to defend the jewel, but also a deck where, okay, now the jewel might get passed around the table. Maybe you have the ability to regain the jewel, right? Maybe you have evasion, like say you're playing a deck with a lot of flyers or something of that nature. People stealing the jewel from you may not even be altogether too horrible, because when you steal the jewel back, you also then get the draw 3 again. And this can be edged politically, of course, where you maybe even let players who might need a little bit of an advantage through, so that they can grab the jewel with the political incentive that, okay, you take the jewel, I'll let you get a little bit of damage through on me. You'll get the cards. Maybe I'll use your assistance now against Big Bad, and I'm going to take it back next turn when I ding you for another one with my flyer. Or maybe, again, politically, a dude that you're going to let through because I let you get this card advantage. So it's got a lot of interesting implications. I just love the way this thing shapes the game.
Yeah, I mean, like, one of my... The first time I saw this was in one of your decks, I think it was Ineaz that you ran it in. And again, that exact principle of, it was a deck where you ran all flying creatures. So, that exact principle of, like, well, now there's a political aspect of you being able to let somebody hit you. Or let's say I hit you, and maybe you can't hit me back, but person number 3 can hit me, and you can hit them. So like it's almost like somebody else might be incentivized to attack a different person, not just to not attack you, but to help you help them help themselves. Like it's the way that interplay has like so many levels to it is, I think it's just incredibly interesting. And I mean, like, I always like taking a look at the mana rocks that cost more mana. Like, there's some draw to me about, like, sure, like, I love a low-cost mana rock because I'm getting mana early. But something at 6 mana is, like... Because the last thing, it's 6 mana, you're starting to hit some bombs, you're starting to hit more win cons, you're hitting, like, some pretty hefty power. So to be like, with my 6 mana, I'm going to play... a mana rock. Like, that to me is just very fun, and it really, like, it just screams to a lot of the effect that this, like Strixhaven Stadium, like we said, has an effect on the game.
Yeah, another thing I really like about it, and this is like a other part of the coin here, is I think this thing gets overlooked a couple times also in some stronger decks. Like, my main, high power deck, like you haven't seen it on the channel. I don't have the ability to really put it on the channel because it is ripe with a few proxies at the moment. But it is my like kind of like closest to CDH variant. But I run a Coveted Jewel in that deck because it's incredible. And I'll tell you the condition in which it is. And I would look at this card if you have decks that have this. But if you have any kind of cost reduction, now obviously like saying rocks are good with cost reduction, or cheating. But like, if you can cheat or cost reduce a Coveted Jewel, especially if you can cheat it into play for 0 or cost reduce it down to 0, this thing is literally a Black Lotus and an Ancestral Recall on one card, right? So like, I have a Heliod, the Phyrexianized one, the Dark Horizon Moon. I don't know, Heliod, the bad, and Heliod basically gives me cost reduction for the number of cards my opponents have drawn in the given turn. So it's very, very easy via the build to be able to get the cost of my spells, including my artifacts, down to basically nothing. 0 if they include no color pips. So with Coveted Jewel, I very frequently can cast that for 0 in that deck, which is inarguably just an unfathomably powerful play, even if somebody can steal it back, which 9 times out of 10 they can't, because I'm probably going to win that turn if I can get a mana positive 3 mana and draw 3 for 0. It pushes me so far over the edge that there's really just no coming back. So I think giving this a look in decks where you can maybe cheat out artifacts, even artifact reanimator decks, man. Like, I think something tooling around with like a Duretti based deck, or I have my what's it called deck, my Mishra deck that likes to reanimate artifacts. Pull this thing out of the grave. It's an ETB trigger on the draw, and then it can immediately tap. If you can reanimate this thing for 0, I mean, like, again, it's pretty spicy. I don't know. I really like it. But why don't you bring us into the next one here with numero 8?
With number 8, we're gonna come in with a nice flavor-filled mana rock here, the Might Stone and Weak Stone. So for 5 mana, you get your legendary Power Stone, and when it enters the battlefield, you get to choose one. So already this is ripe with choices. So you draw 2 cards, wonderful, or target creature gets -5/-5 till end of turn, and then it has the ability to tap to add 2 waste. That mana cannot be spent to cast non-artifact spells. So there's a lot to unpack on this card. But if we're going to start stapling things on to mana rocks, let's give it some removal. Let's give it card advantage. And then it adds for 2 mana. So it's not just adding for 1, which is really nice. I think that restriction would be heavily penalized if it was only 1 mana. But okay, you can't use it to cast non-artifact spells. You can activate activated abilities. You can cast artifact spells. It can kill something when it comes in, like something that is it was not original on this list for me, but you bring it up. Like, it's not an incidental 1 damage. It is not an incidental 2 damage. It is a -5/-5. That's a lot.
Yeah, I just again, that's the reason why this goes on the top 10 for me. I think Might Stone Weak Stone is awesome because it's one of the only mana rocks out there, in, like, for me, or at least in my exposure, that really has a reliable and relevant like option for removal. Like, I mean, you think about like Meteorite or whatever, that like Draft Chaff one that's like 5 mana, taps at any color and then deals 2. Like, when it enters, like, this thing not only like quote unquote deals 5, but it's doing it in a -5/-5 variant, which also gets indestructibility, which has become like, a pretty easy staple onto a lot of cards with our like incredible swath of options for gods and things of that nature. I think this even gets Erois, who's like a big pain in the butt, and I see him a lot. 'Cause he's a 7/4, right?
It does.
Yeah, so like, I don't know, it's pretty wild. And if you guys really want to see this thing do something nutty, go ahead and watch our, and this is not just like a shameless plug, literally though, this is just an example, but if you watch our Waste Not Want Not gameplay episode, where we do a little bit of a colorless battle, there's a really awesome moment where this gets flashed in and takes out that crazy juggernaut daddy
Raz.
from the Phyrexia set, and it's like a huge swingy moment. And the fact that like those moments can happen or exist as like an incidental benefit on a mana rock is the reason why I think this thing is so cracked. Obviously, if that's not going to be relevant for you, you get to draw 2 cards. It's not even like it's like pigeonholed into that. So if you have a situation where that's not going to take any threat out for you, go ahead and get the 2 cards off of this thing. I mean, that's not a horrid rate if you think about it. It literally like a Harmonize, which is still seeing some play, obviously, is 4 mana, draw 3. This is a 5 mana, draw 2 that then refunds you the 2 mana as long as you can use it. Obviously, the reason why this one is down lower on the list is because of the restriction on the mana. Although, like John said, and I think that's a great point, you can still use it for other things. It doesn't say can only be used to cast artifact spells, very intentionally. It says can't be spent to cast non-artifact spells, which means, like John said, you can feed it into activated abilities or other forms of mana sinks, which is how I often end up using this when I don't have an artifact to pull out. So I really like this one. I don't know. I'm always going to be a fighter for my own weak zone. I think this thing can slot into so many decks. But next up here, we have one that is a pretty obvious choice, but number 7, we're coming in with the Throne of Eldraine, which I'm sure you guys have heard of by now from Wilds. It is absolutely cooked. It is a 5 mana rock. As it enters the battlefield, you got to choose a color. Then it can tap to add 4 mana of the chosen color, but you can only spend that mana to cast mono-colored spells of that color. You can also tap 3 and tap it to draw 2 cards, and then spend only mana of the chosen color to activate that ability, so conditional. Obviously, this thing is nutty. I mean, it's got to go in, I think, like mono-color to maybe dual color if you have like some kind of very predominantly one color dual color deck. I actually have this in a dual color deck that is pretty much a mono green deck with maybe 1 or 2 white cards. It's my Selesnya Jasmine Boreal deck. It's it's not really like truly dual color, but most of the time this is your monocolor deck, and as such, man, the reason it's on here so low is because it's pigeonholed into monocolor. But for monocolor, I mean, hello, this thing doesn't come into play tapped. It immediately adds you 4 mana. It costs 5. Hello, like what's happening?
Yeah, I mean, like,
I don't know.
Everybody, I remember the internet seeing Scepter of Eternal Glory and being like, wow, this is insane, because it adds 3 mana of the one color?
I believe.
5 is not a bad cost. When this is 4, oh no, oh boo! Like, it's funny because I looked at the card and first off, let's just check the box of Flavor Wind. It was the next set on Eldraine, and the original one was, of Eldraine, and then this is freaking the Throne of Eldraine. Like, that's cool. But the restriction of monocolor, sure, I'm not running this in my Joda the Unifier deck, but like, hello, in literally every other, I only own one, and I don't know where to put it yet, because I have enough monocolor decks, and I'm like, I want to put it in all of them. Like, I just think that the fact that it refunds almost all of it, it can only be used to cast monocolor spell. Oh no, to me, that restriction is like, all that's doing is saying you have to put it in that kind of deck. It's not bad. Yeah. It is not a problem. It is just letting you know where it belongs. It's not making you guess what to do with it. It's like, if you didn't know, put me in a monocolor deck. I'm going to tell you to. And then the fact that it also lets you draw 2 cards. 3 mana tap, draw 2 cards. Oh no, I have too much mana. I've never said that myself necessarily, but oh no, I have too much mana. Boom, card advantage. I think it's super. It's just good. It's super good. It's super good.
Yeah, for sure.
But let's get off that throne and get to number 6. We're going to talk about the Liquid Metal Torque. That's a 2 mana rock. Super cool. It adds a waste mana. And then you can also tap it and target non-land permanent becomes an artifact in addition to its other types until the end of the turn. That is a super unique ability. Like, not only is it very good, but the reason I like it is because it's changing or adding a type to a card has numerous implications. I mean, if I'm going to be 100% honest with you guys, I had never run this card in a deck ever in my life, and then EDH Recast, Joey, thank you, mentioned it, that he uses it in his Baba Saga deck. Again, if you guys haven't listened to them, go ahead. Not a sponsor, but they're fun. And I started thinking about this card, and I was like, if that thing says destroy a non-artifact, I can make a thing an artifact. If that thing says destroy only an artifact, I can make something into an artifact. Like, and it's target non-land permanent. So I can affect my stuff, I can affect your stuff, I can affect somebody else's stuff. Like, the ability this thing has on a 2 mana rock, I just think it has such a like high ceiling to what it can do at such a low cost.
Yeah, for sure. I think I had this thing in like, I don't know, maybe like 1 or 2 decks, but it was really incidental. I mainly had it in decks where like I already had artifact synergies, and the intent was to like turn something into an artifact to get like 1 more count.
Yep.
I didn't really think through like all the implications of removal and things of that nature until we really started looking at it more deeper, around when like EDH Rec was talking about it a little bit more. And then like, I don't know, so I have it in quite a few decks now. And one way I also really like it, like I have it in my modular based deck, which you guys haven't seen on the channel yet, but I'll pull it out at some point. I really like it in that sentiment because modular only lets you move the counters onto an artifact creature. So being able to Liquid Metal Torque something into an artifact to receive the modular counters. If I'm in a pinch, my commander in that deck is not an artifact creature. So, worst case scenario, if I have things dying en masse, I only got protection on 1 dude or something, but it happens to be a non-artifact. This thing can help me pop it into an artifact real quick so I can seal my modular counters. And now all of a sudden my commander's beefed up, with my modular counters, and I have a threat still, so especially in things like modular or any of those little small idiosyncrasy things, really think about your artifact synergies, because this thing could play a lot of like niche roles. I mean, think about like all the stuff we have that untaps, target artifact or whatever, right? Like think about the implications there. If you're running something like that and happen to like, I don't know, have a Gigantha or something, what I mean? If that boy becomes an artifact, now you can untap him. I mean, there's a lot you could do there. It's just the implications are kind of endless. Anything that has artifact interaction, this thing can affect. I just think that's kind of nutty. But next up, guys, we got number 5. We are halfway down, and we are looking at the midnight clock, which is halfway through a day, or I guess like technically, whatever. You get what I'm saying. Okay, it didn't land. Forgive me. It is a 2 generic and 1 blue pip artifact that can tap to add blue. Then you can pay 2 and a blue to put an hour counter on the midnight clock. It also says at the beginning of each upkeep, mind you, you put an hour counter on the midnight clock. And when the 12th hour counter is put on the midnight clock, you shuffle your hand and graveyard into your library and then draw 7 cards and exile the midnight clock. So this one's pretty like simple to look at, but I really like it. So obviously hand refilling, like card draw, is the best thing in Magic. Duh. Come on now. But the midnight clock is pretty fire. In our little format here on the channel so far, obviously, like we said, we're a 4-player channel at heart. But it's not so powerful in a 1v1, so you may not have seen it in like a ton of decks of ours so far, because that very, very important key wording right at the beginning of each upkeep. It's only triggering twice per round in our situation, but you're going to get 4 triggers per round in a normative situation, which means you are on a 3-turn clock. in a normal 4-player game to see this thing go off. And waiting 3 turns to draw 7 is, situationally not very good if that was all the card was doing. But this is a mana rock. So, obviously as a 3-mana mana rock, something that has the predictive, I'm going to refill my hand with this thing eventually, unless you waste removal on it, is pretty nuts. And most often, people will then waste removal on this thing. So a mana rock that eats removal for you a little bit later is still pretty good. I mean, if you can get your important game pieces a little bit more protection because you have an ancillary effect on your rock that is way too scary, I don't know. That's pretty awesome. Obviously, if you can cost reduce the ability to add hour counters, you can speed that clock up. Or if you just have excess mana, it's late game, and you can pump a bunch of stuff into that. Obviously, that can also be something that's helpful for you. But I've never really used the add counters ability. I just kind of let this thing tick up on its own and just let it ride. And I love it. I don't know. This thing's pretty awesome.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely have used the ability to add more counters to it. A few times. I do run it, believe it or not. I think it's in one of my higher power decks because I run 2 or 3 instances of ability cost reduction. So being able to leave some mana up, and maybe I want to leave it up for responsiveness, and then because of the cost reduction, maybe I have an extra blue mana or 2 floating around, get myself an extra 2 counters. Being able to kind of change when this thing pops off is something else I like. It's not purely that you have to wait. So maybe it's not something I do all the time or something that's even the best utilization of my mana. But I like that you can manipulate it. Maybe you're playing a super responsive heavy deck and you know that it's going to pop off on your turn and you'd rather have it pop off on your opponent's turn. There's just a lot of things you could do with that. So it's super fun, and one of these days it's going to pop off. And I'm going to get to draw those 7 cards.
This is probably pretty bum nutty in Kinnan, right?
That's one of the decks I was talking about. I put it when I did an overhaul. Long story short, guys, that deck is mostly green, but that blue mana is so important, and there's not a lot of elves that add blue. So I added Midnight Clock as a thing that adds blue, that because of Kinnan would then add 2 blue. So with the cost reduction, I can even just leave up the Midnight Clock, tap it, get 2 blue, and put 2 counters on it at the end of somebody's turn, which is a lot. It is a lot.
Yeah. Not to mention, it's not a tap to put the counters on, obviously, so you can do multiple out of shot, and you could even use the mana from itself to put it in. Yeah, that's pretty cool. I like that.
But number 4, the door is 4. We're talking about a newer mana rock here, the Sonic Screwdriver. So, 3 mana, again, not a bad thing. It does tap to add 1 mana of any color, so already we're starting off strong. We're getting out of the mono color for this one. And then it has not 1, not 2, but 3 extraneous activated abilities. So for 1 and tap it, you can untap another target artifact. Pair that with your Liquid Metal Torque. For 2 and tap it, you can scry 1. And for 3 and tap it, target creature can't be blocked this turn. I think the implications of that are numerous because it can do 3 auxiliary things. We've all seen the absolute nonsense you can get out of Staff of Completion, Staff of the other one that you guys all know what I'm talking about, I'm sure. Let me know in the comments.
Domination.
I forget it. Domination. Any of those artifacts. But, I think one of my favorites, so I don't just sit here and talk for 3 hours about all of those abilities, the fact that you can make target creature cannot be blocked this turn. Again, I'm playing a multiplayer format most of the time. So, if I want your big thing to not be able to block when it swings at that guy, that's really cool. That's really interesting. And it's all of that ability and decision and choice and options attached to a rock that can add 1 of any color.
Yeah, this thing is insane. Okay. So, I hate to say, it's obviously not an auto include and everything, but, this could go into any deck justifiably. I couldn't see anybody really giving you an argument. It's just that versatile. Even if you can't use the first ability, you don't have a lot of artifacts you want to tap, who cares? Doesn't matter. It's still so good. I mean, really, honestly, because it's like what, like the first ability there is that one thing like Voltaic Key or whatever that just can untap an artifact. The last ability is like a cost reduced Rogue's Passage. Second ability there is like a slightly worse Crystal Ball. I mean, and the fact that all this is nudged into one card. That worst case scenario, you use none of this, and it's still just a decent rate mana rock. You know what I mean? Like a 3-mana mana rock. Listen, obviously, we in the comfort zone are proponents of you can still play them. We are playing casual, comfortable commander. Okay, at the rate and intensity that we play, you could definitely waste your third turn dropping a rock, and you're probably not going to get blown out of the water unless we talked about it beforehand and we're playing some of our super high power decks. And even in those situations, sometimes these things can sneak in. This guy, I just think, is crazy. The utility is absolutely unbelievable, and like John said, the ability to give a creature unblockable can end games. And at the rate that this thing allows you 3 mana to do so, that's nuts. I love this card. I wish it was cheap. I may have more of them at that rate. But we're moving into number 3, which this one is a bit of a, you probably expected it here, and you weren't wrong. It's the Greathenge. The Greathenge is a 7-mana green. You don't need me to tell you this. I'm doing it anyway. The spell costs X less to cast, where X is the greatest power among creatures you control. It can then tap to add 2 green, and you gain 2 life. And whenever a non-token creature enters battlefield under your control, you put a +1/+1 counter on it, and you draw a card. Okay, sure. You know, why not? All right, so obviously, first things first. Cost X less to cast, where X is the greatest power. Anything that this is going in, I don't think I have ever cast this for more than 2 mana. I'm not sure that I ever have. If I did, it was for like a straight 9 mana because I like was board wiped or something and just had way excess lands. But like otherwise, if I have it in the deck 9 times out of 10, I can very easily get to that 7 power for some reason. That's really not that much at this point with power creep and the state of commander as is. If you're playing a green deck, you probably got something up there. But I mean, even if you had to play this thing for 3 or for 4, it's still going to net you back 2 green instantaneously same turn. So you're at a mana deficit of what? 1? 2? Oh no. You also then get to gain 2 life and probably in the same turn drop a critter, get a +1/+1 beef counter on that boy, and draw a card. A 3-mana rock that refunds you 2, draws you a card same turn. That's unbelievable, right? If that was it, and it's not. Okay, it continues. Every turn you get 2 mana off this baddie and more card advantage. You could get insane card advantage off of this thing. Obviously, any deck that this goes in, you know, I don't know. It's an arguable. This guy just had to be here. It's a bit of a boring pick, as we talked about as we were putting it on the list, but like, I don't know. I like the Greathenge. I really do love it, but it's become kind of like the Crater Hoofs of mana rocks in the sense of like, if you're running green and you got dudes, it's in the deck. Probably you're probably tired of seeing it and it's super powerful, but I don't know. It's still fun and the art is really cool. So it's on here. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, you know me, man. I love this card. I know it's super good. I know that it had to be on the list. You're drawing cards. You're gaining incidental life. You're adding mana. You're making your creatures bigger. And I have also never cost this thing for more than 2 mana. It's just insane. I mean, again, the most satisfying cast of this being, of course, in Joda. I pay 2 mana and I get to Pseudo Cascade for 9. I think that discard's a joke in that deck. It's so good. Yeah. It's just so good. There's not a whole lot else to say about it, but it's really good. Another card in our number 2 slot that I don't know if you're going to be surprised, because I wasn't surprised we put it on this list, and it's also in that Joda deck because it's also really dumb. We're talking about the Chromatic Gy. It's a 7-mana artifact. It's legendary. You may spend mana as though it were mana of any color. Do whatever you want with your mana. Then it taps to add 5 waste. So, if you need the 5 waste, there they are. And if you don't, they can be anything else. And that's not it! It also has 5 and tap and draw a card for each color among permanents you control. So if you're really bored and don't want to use that 5 mana on something for some reason, draw a bunch of cards. This card, it's a card that, like, it came out longer ago than I started using it. And I've been thrilled about its performance everywhere I've put it. I don't run it in all my decks. I probably could, and I don't think anybody would judge me for it. But like this thing has immediate impact. It's a high mana cost, but you're getting 5 mana out of it, and it's 5 mana. It's not color restricted. It's not card type restricted. Like, it's just 5 of whatever you want, and it has the ability to draw cards.
Yeah, this thing is absolutely crazy. I mean, there's really like no two ways about it. I mean, like, obviously the color fixing is not supremely relevant. I think it's mainly on there to give you like maximum versatility, like with the actual mana that the Chromatic Gy produces. In any deck that you presumably have this in, once you get to a point where you could cast the 7 mana rock, you probably have your fixing. So that's not as impactful, like the most imperative line. But coming down and being able to tap for 5 is a really awesome rate at 7. As you've seen with multiple things on this list, I really like to look at, how much mana am I getting back, like the return on investment, right? Like, the ROI for all you investors out there. This thing has a pretty big ROI, and it keeps giving, because the next turn you're going to get another 5, right? So like, being able to pull this thing down if they don't waste removal on it, which they very well might, it's extremely powerful. But you could end up with a 7 for 10 swap if you even keep this thing for the first turn and the second turn that it's out. Awesome rate. Secondarily, obviously, it can come down and immediately get you the card draw if you happen to have the mana available to do so, which is not to be overlooked. I mean, but worst case scenario, not worst case scenario, probable scenario, it's coming down for 7, you're tapping it for 5 turn 1. If you can untap it, you could immediately then filter that in and draw the cards, but most times it's just going to give you the mana refund. Second turn though, you can easily turn this into a draw 5, assuming you have this in your 5 color deck. But honestly, I run this I believe I have this in one of my 3 color decks, because I really just don't care. I mean, 7 mana, come down, add 5, and then add 5 forever. I mean, Timeless Lotus that comes in untapped, so I got to pay a little bit extra mana. I don't care. This thing is crazy, okay? Plain and simple. Next up here, guys, we're at number 1. And this thing might shock you that we put it here instead of some of the other ones, because the talking points are probably less. But it's incredibly good. And honestly, I really just like it a lot. But it is the Relic of Legends. Okay, Relic of Legends, if you haven't seen this, it's a 3 mana rock that can tap to add 1 mana of any color, but it also has the all very important ability that says tap an untapped legendary creature you control to add 1 mana of any color. Now, this thing is crazy, and I love it for a lot of reasons. One, the art, it looks like Coalition Relic in snow, which is really cool because it's Relic of Legends. So I don't know if that was kind of like a callback. I presume it probably was, because this is from Dominaria, right? So it probably has something to do with like some really interesting story element, which gives me like a really intense desire to know now that I'm thinking about this, because I would love to present it to you guys, explaining that it's flavorful. It looks like it probably is. If you know, this is a great opportunity for you to get involved in the comments, and please tell me the story time. I love the lore. But anyway. Obviously, the incredible part here is that the tap and untap legendary creature you control to add a mana is not a tapped ability. It is an infinitely activatable ability. And it is an ability of the Relic. It does not grant your legends the ability to tap for mana. It gives you the ability to tap your legends through the Relic to add the mana. This, we've seen many times, being able to be cracked apart and blown out of wazoo. Okay, Azami, Lady of Scrolls, one of my first commander decks, which was absolutely buffs, like unbelievable strong, allowed you to tap wizards to draw cards through Azami. So you could play a wizard and immediately tap it to draw a card, even though you're tapping it. It's not a thing that's affected by summoning sickness because it's filtered through Azami. Same kind of idea here with the Relic of Legends. Whenever you play a legend, you're going to be able to immediately tap it for mana. So the cantrip ability, it is just confounding. And I'm sure John can say a little bit more because he has a Legendary Matters deck. But the reason it's up here at number 1 is I could honestly see putting this in almost any commander deck, like bar none, strapped. Worst case scenario, in most situations, this thing is not really like a 3 mana add 1. It's generally a 3 mana add 2 in most of the decks that this thing is thrown into, at bare minimum, because your commander's probably chilling out. And if you're throwing this in a deck, most of the decks I have this in, my commander doesn't really want to go to face. So having the ability to tap it for mana on Relic of Legends, this is really like your only true to form, perfected 3 mana to add 2 mana of a color turn it comes out. That's incredible.
Yeah, I mean, like, again, I won't get into the fact that in the Legendary Matters deck, you can flip out guys and then you're tapping them and you're playing more. It's stupid. But the reason I get so amped about it is I have three. I have more than one deck with multiple commanders. The same reason that in those deck backgrounds just get me, so good, is this thing. So not only is it a 3 mana tap to add 2, it's 3 mana tap to add 3. I don't know if you remember, but I have a Yoshimaru the dog and Rograk. That is a 0 mana and a 1 mana commander. This card says 3 mana. I can play both my commanders with the land. This allows me to tap them, but like that, just the ability to have access to your commanders and having multiple. Plus, they've only printed approximately 15,000 legends in the last couple of years. So the incidental, like, that creature's also a legend. Turn he comes out, he's not tapping for his own ability. He's not attacking. He adds mana. Great. Awesome. Hooray. Phenomenal. There's zero downsides to that at all.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, take a rip through your decks and just note how many legends you have. I mean, like John said, I mean, obviously this is old news, the density of legends that they've been printing, but the implications for Relic are just insane. Like, there's so many decks of mine where I don't even realize it, but like, a good 20% of the creature base is legendary just because they're legends. You know what I mean? Like, it's just like, it's the vibe of R&D at the moment. It's the hot thing. It's right. So, and like you said too, like, again, I love that idea, right? Is that like the creature too, when it comes out, useless because of summoning sickness. This gives it a use. And if your thing is cheap, you might just be casting free dudes. 1 mana legends, bro. Come out and they refund you. That's a net 0. This thing is nuts. It's number 1. Okay. All right. And honestly, guys, to wrap this up too, we debated this for a long time. Okay. This list, it was really hard to do because, again, like, we're not really so good at top 10ing because we love such a wide variety of cards and a wide variety of applications. We have so many decks, and niche rocks and niche effects are just so hard to try to like debias and generate something that's more like a generalized top 10. So these positions swapped, time and time again as we were debating the list. So should this thing be a 2 or this thing be a 3, so on and so forth. We ended on the list just based on an interesting and engaging discussion that we had. And that's kind of the beauty of this thing, right? Mm-hmm. There is really no right or wrong top 10 list. This is our, like, quote unquote, for right now, our official comfort zone commander top 10 because of what we just talked about and went through. But once we build 10 more decks, we'll probably have a different top 10 for you. Once they release more sets, we might get some more diversification. But the fun comes in when you guys get involved. Do this project for yourselves, or tell us what you think of our top 10. Jump on the Discord and we can try to make a full community top 10. But it's not to be taken as law or any kind of like, this is empirically the truth. It's more just like, hey, if you haven't seen some of these things, you haven't experienced some of the play directions and game states that they create, give them a shot if you thought any of them sound interesting. I think a lot of mana rocks get overlooked, especially now that we have that colloquialism of the, you can't play anything that's over a 2 mana rock. Some of these ancillary effects are just so strong and game impacting on a rock that they deserve a second look, and they're a lot of fun. But with all that being said, guys, let us know what you think and take a peekarino at that subscribe button because it helps the channel a lot and we would greatly appreciate it. And while you're down there, join the Discord because we want to hear from you. But that's all we got for you today, so thank you for hanging out with us, being comfy and having this conversation, and we will talk to you in the multiverse.